What's up guys? Unless you've been living under a rock, you probably know that right now as of recording we're living in a pandemic. The coronavirus, COVID-19, is impacting pretty much everyone, every person, every individual, every building, every business in some sort of way. The film and cinema industries have been affected big time. Cinemas are flat out closed. Films have been delayed or postponed or released digitally. There's all sorts of stuff going on. So today I'm going to run you through what has been happening to films, to the industry, and what this could potentially mean for the future. Firstly, the big obvious one. Cinemas are closed. People can't gather in these big open spaces in their hundreds potentially to watch movies, so the cinemas have been closed, and because of that, films haven't been getting released. Big budget blockbusters like No Time to Die and Black Widow have been delayed to later in this year, and the way things are going, it's potential that they could get delayed even more. In some cases, like Fast and Furious 9, also known as F9, they've been delayed even longer, not to the end of this year, but till sometime in next year.
I got nothing but time.
And because a lot of these big blockbuster films are part of larger ongoing franchises with lots of plans and schedules for the future, whenever these films have been getting delayed, it means that their sequels, their spin-offs, things like Doctor Strange, have been delayed as well. So Black Widow getting delayed to later this year and pushes back all of Marvel's plans next year, and so on and so forth. It's like the domino effect. One thing knocks over the other, and another, and another, and another. It keeps going until hopefully you get some sort of balance and order to things again. And because of these release delays and dodgy scheduling issues that the coronavirus is causing, all the films that are getting delayed now have new competition to face. So the films that were originally scheduled to be released probably want to move away from these big blockbusters because all of a sudden they've got these huge competition. So again, scheduling has to change. Things have to be moved around and juggled here and there and everywhere. Not only for the sake of competition, but just so they've actually got some room to release them. If there's any good news to come from this, assuming this all settles down in the next few months, it means that next year, maybe even the end of this year, cinemas are going to be jam-packed with things to watch. You're not going to have much to complain about that way on. Some films, however, weren't so lucky. Some films were currently in cinemas when they shut down. Some films were scheduled to be released right when they were shut down. Films like The Invisible Man and The Hunt were currently in cinemas at the time of the shutdown, which means that they had to suddenly stop being shown in cinemas. So what happened is they were released digitally instead, at a higher price than a usual digital price in order to make up for the losses. But it means that if you couldn't or didn't want to go to the cinemas to see these films, they're there available at home to watch in your own time, which is great. But what this does mean is that almost everyone, if you look hard enough, can in fact see The Invisible Man. Films like Trolls World Tour though, they were scheduled to come out in cinemas, and because of the shutdown, they couldn't do that. So they went straight to digital release instead. Same with the upcoming film Scoob. And the word is, Trolls World Tour was a huge success digitally, at least financially speaking. Yes, it doesn't compare to what it would have been in the cinemas, but it's still something that makes you think, oh, maybe we should consider this in the future. Why though? Why was this a big success, you might wonder? Well, speaking specifically for this film, it might not apply to every single film or every single digital release. It probably doesn't. If it released in cinemas, 50% of the profits would have went to the cinema. However, because it didn't release in cinema, it released digitally instead, in which case 80% of the profits went to the filmmakers. That's a pretty significant chunk. So if you assume that because the film gets released digitally, more people are going to see it at home, and therefore if it can somehow get the numbers of people in to view the film at home rather than at the cinemas, releasing digitally could be a very financially satisfying and pleasing thing for the big studios. However, exact numbers and details are hard to come by right now because of the lack of cinematic releases, and in the interest of fairness, they've actually stopped tracking the release figures as well, because, you know, it's not very fair if your film's only getting a partial cinematic release. Isn't that nice now? But this Trolls World Tour thing, there's more to that story. Wow, is there more? And I'll be touching on that in just a bit. Who thought that an animated film about a bunch of kids' toys could cause so much uproar? The success of Trolls World Tour does mean that other studios might consider a digital release in some regard, or maybe an earlier digital release, if not a total digital release instead of going to cinemas. Universal Pictures has said that's exactly what they're considering, and well, that's caused some problems. This could result in a big boom for streaming services. Things like Disney Plus, if they release their films on Disney Plus, could they be a huge success? Who knows, because that's of course a streaming service, it's a little different. But going straight to digital is a very tempting thing to consider. Artemis Fowl, an upcoming Disney film, was originally going to be released in cinemas. It's now going straight to Disney Plus. So this is going to be a huge judge in just what the viewing habits are in the current state of things. If Artemis Fowl is a huge success, if it draws people in and people watch it on Disney Plus in the numbers that they originally would have watched it in cinemas, that could sway things a bit going in the future. But it should be noted that the big blockbuster films, the ones that are then mastered in IMAX and added with some 3D glitz and glamour, there's a lot of work and effort that goes into that, which increases the ticket price at the cinema, which means that cinematic releases probably do get more money in terms of these big, huge blockbuster films, especially when people often go see them multiple times. So I haven't done the maths here, but it might be worthwhile for these big blockbuster movies to still stick to cinematic releases. On the more unfortunate, sad news side of things, it means that because films aren't being released in cinemas, it means that the box office intake is at an all-time low. Big and small cinemas and businesses alike could potentially go out of business. AMC, one of the big ones in America, who owns Odeon, one of the big ones here in the UK, is going to potentially file for bankruptcy. That's how dire things are getting. And that's one of the big ones. Imagine what the little ones are going through. Now we get into probably the biggest topic in news of this whole situation. AMC have now refused to release future Universal Pictures films in their cinemas. Why? It's all to do with Universal Pictures' choice to go to digital and streaming platforms as opposed to or in conjunction with cinematic releases. Because they released Trolls World Tour and it turns out they get a lot of money from that and it was a big success, they're thinking, right, maybe if we release digitally and we go to cinemas we can get the best of both worlds. Well, AMC's like, no, that's not how things work. That's not fair. I don't know all the details of this, I've got to be honest, but it looks like AMC and Universal Pictures had some sort of deal in place, and by releasing Trolls World Tour digitally rather than waiting for a cinematic release, or by planning on releasing future films digitally as well as in cinemas, that somehow breaks the deal that they had in place, and AMC is just not happy with that. And this isn't just AMC and Odeon in the UK. Regal Cinemas, who's also associated with another big chain in the UK, Cineworld, has agreed to support AMC, which means that Universal Pictures will not be shown in two of the biggest cinematic chains in the UK, which leaves only one other huge significant chain, which is View Cinemas here in the UK. I don't know what the case is for America, but it means these big films like Fast and Furious probably are going to struggle getting cinematic releases, or they're just going to have smaller scale cinematic releases instead. Now initially in this script I had a bad joke here about AMC bluffing and bolstering too much, but with Regal Cinemas getting on their side, it looks like maybe that's not the case. Maybe they've actually got a bigger argument and things might actually go in their favour. Who knows? So regardless of what happens here, whether AMC caves, whether Universal Pictures caves, we'll just have to wait and see on that. Regardless though, the future of cinema is going to look and feel very different. And no matter what happens, when cinemas do eventually reopen, when films do eventually get released again, there's going to be a little hesitancy, unless there's a big reveal of a huge cure for the coronavirus, there's going to be a hesitancy for a lot of people to gather in an enclosed place to watch a film, which could affect how successful the initial new release of cinematic releases are. But it's not all bad for cinemas. There's a certain type of cinema that's actually doing pretty well. That's drive-through cinemas. You know, the old-fashioned 1950s style experience of sitting in a car, watching a big screen through your dirty windscreen. Yeah, because people in their cars are isolated from one another, so they can still go and see the cinema. But the thing is, I don't think drive-through cinemas are a big thing. I don't even think we have them here in the UK. So they're not getting the new releases, they're showing older films, I believe, and they are a much smaller scale. So while these individual drive-through cinemas are being more successful, it's probably not viable to think that, oh, we're suddenly going to get a bunch of new drive-through theatres in the future. But it's something. But that's just talking about what's happening right now in this moment, with films being released, films scheduled to be released. What about future films? What about the ones that are like a year out or whatever? And what about the ones that are still in production, the ones that are still being made? Well, films like Mission Impossible 7 and 8, which were being filmed back to back, have had to stop production altogether because they were meant to be filming in Italy. So filming amid this coronavirus pandemic, it turns out is one stunt too many for Tom Cruise, and that's saying something. But in Warner Brothers area, the Batman, the big Batman film we've all been waiting for, has also stopped production and has had to be delayed. Basically, if there's any filming to be done or any pre-production to be done on a film, chances are it's had to stop. The ones that might get a little lucky is where the filming has been finished and they're only in the post-production, so things like CGI and editing, which can, to an extent, be done at home. But honestly, it's probably a case-by-case basis. One film doing this probably doesn't mean another one's gonna do it. But looking deeper into this, just because a film's been delayed, just because it's not gonna come out at the expected time, that's not the worst of it. It could be far worse. Actors have schedules, and they have to balance these schedules really carefully if they are busy working actors. Often when they finish filming one product, they move on to the next or they have a break. Sometimes they even work on multiple ones at once. So on the Tuesday they might film one thing, and then on the Wednesday they have to go and film another thing somewhere else or whatever. So let's look at Robert Pattinson as a potential example. This is all theoretical, by the way, no exact things going on here. He's currently supposed to be filming the Batman, but because that's stopped, he's not doing anything. Now, being the Batman, he has to remain in good shape. He has to look physically like Bruce Wayne, like Batman. So while filming stopped, he's somehow got to maintain his appearance. He's got to somehow keep up the exercise and the diet regime necessary for this film. And that's probably a hard thing. And it doesn't just go for him, it goes for everyone else in this film and all other films around the world. By time production picks up again on these films, it's very possible that the actors look different to what they did when they initially started filming it. So that initial stuff might have to be reshot entirely, or they might have to do something around that and try and figure out a way of adding in the appearance change, or maybe even just getting the characters and actors back into shape, back into the way they look. So there's more work and effort being put into it. Then, looking at it from a more logistical standpoint, scheduling and arrangements have to be shifted around. If after the Batman, Robert Pattinson was meant to move on to another project, well, that project's probably been delayed too. And because of the delay in the Batman, who knows when that's going to happen now. So all of their schedules have had to completely change now. So much so that they might just flat out not be able to star in whatever they were planned to star in next. But if this gets so bad, if actors' appearances do change, that could cause further delays. Worse than that though, actors might have to just drop out of films altogether because of the scheduling. And God forbid this happens, but we are living in a pandemic, people are getting ill, people are dying. If actors do succumb to this, if they do sadly pass away, they might need to be recast entirely. And all these delays, it means that the film studios are still pumping in money to them. So if the Batman keeps getting delayed, it means more and more money is going into them to keep these actors free, to keep them on board with this production. It could end up being that these films end up getting cancelled or scrapped entirely, or might have to restart from scratch all over again because of too much money going into them. And a lot of these films could end up being in some stage of production hell. And this doesn't just apply to actors, it could apply to writers and directors as well if they've got other work and commitments to do. Trying to manage all of this could be a dark nightmare. And because of all these delays, because of the amount of money that they're funneling into these products that are going to be coming out God only knows when, and because of the lack of income that they've currently got, a lot of these producers and distributors could be in financial trouble. Smaller companies could very possibly end up closing their doors altogether. And the bigger ones could prioritise the money grabbers. So the big blockbuster action movies that are guaranteed to draw in an audience are guaranteed to get them some money. This could in turn mean that only a certain type of film gets made in the next couple of years while the studios recuperate and get some money flowing in. That way they can make a much more variety of products again. But it also means the smaller scale films like indies of new upcoming filmmakers and actors and producers and whatever might not get greenlit, might not get released, might not even get made. It's not all doom and gloom on this front though. The current pandemic will no doubt inspire certain filmmakers and writers. I guarantee you that in the next couple of years we're going to see films based on or inspired by what's currently happening. Hell, we're already seeing TV shows being commissioned about this incident, about self-isolation and so on. Netflix has just announced a TV show in that regard. Look at some of the older films like Contagion and Outbreak. They are having huge success on streaming services because of what's going on. Despite the horrific things that are happening in the world right now because of the pandemic, people are really strangely interested in it and want to see potentially what could happen. That's a little odd. Taking a little bit of a left turn here, what about festivals? Well, obviously the festivals have stopped too. You can't gather all these people in one place like that. So what this means is that new upcoming indie films either haven't been released or have had to be delayed release or had to be released in an alternate way, which means that new upcoming filmmakers who were hoping for their big break have simply lost out. That's a real shame. Now Amazon Prime tried to step in with one of the festivals and digitally distribute the films that were going to be shown there, only it seemed it didn't really work because, well, it came and went and nobody paid much attention to it. Finally, what about awards? What about the big award shows? Well, we've actually just heard some big news about that recently. Before this news came out, it looked like the big contenders for the awards would have been the early blockbusters this year like The Gentleman or Birds of Prey, which would have been really cool and somewhat funny, but that's not going to be the case anymore. I mean, just imagine, what if Sonic the Hedgehog was a contender for Best Picture? Now that would have been a good laugh. Well, the previous rules for numerous award shows, particularly the Academy Awards, stated that a film had to have at least a limited run in cinemas to be eligible. There are some smaller, more specific caveats and details in there, but I'm not going to dive into them just now. You just need to know that cinematic release was necessary. Now, for this year only, the Academy Awards have stated that they're going to allow films that were released digitally are going to be eligible for nomination this year. But again, it's just for this year, and it only applies to films that were either released digitally, that were scheduled to be released cinematically. So if your film was scheduled to go straight to digital streaming services, no matter what, then you've lucked out, sadly. It had to have at least been planned to get a cinematic release. And another caveat to this is that as soon as the theatres are open again, this is dropped. It only applies to this current period of time that we're in now, which means that if your film goes straight to digital release after the cinemas are open again, then you're not considered. So while all this chaos in the pandemic is going on, the awards are still being as snobby as ever, it seems, with all their rules and eligibility issues and so on. But that's everything I could come up with off the top of my head, just to give you a broad overview of what's happening to the film and cinematic industries right now because of the coronavirus. I want to note before I go that these were mere possibilities. Not everything that I've mentioned here is definitely going to happen. It's not all doom and gloom. Films are still going to get made, films are still going to get released. It just might be a little differently in the future. Possibly. And also, because this is a broad overview, just giving you some of the specific points and details that are happening right now and in the near future, I've probably overlooked a few things. So yeah, just be aware of that. This is not meant to be an expansive, in detail, deep dive into every single element. But ultimately, in this pandemic, hopefully you're all staying at home in isolation unless you're an essential worker like me. In which case, stay safe, be healthy, be smart. And of course, if you've liked this video, if you found it informative or entertaining or whatever else, subscribe to my channel. The more subscribers I get, the more content like this I can make. And of course, go over to Twitter and Instagram, follow me at _Grant Burton for all my up-to-date thoughts and opinions on whatever the hell's going on. Until next time though, thanks for watching.